their worship before the world, or when he called for them to be worshipped at Assisi, or when he taught that their religions are the products of divine work. I believe, rather, that he was sanctified when he worshipped the true God in the Catholic Church. That response fails, however. The person who makes such an argument is still implicated in idolatry and has denied the first commandment. For in that case, the person is stating that true and sanctifying worship of the one true God, the kind of worship needed to become a saint, does not necessarily exclude serving other gods or building their temples. But the very first commandment of the one true God is, "You shall not have strange gods before me, you shall not serve other gods, and you shall not worship other gods, for I am a jealous God." Exodus chapters 20 and 34. The very first commandment of the one true God tells us that sanctifying worship of Him, the kind of worship needed to become a saint, necessarily excludes as its first and primary condition serving other gods, building their temples, etc. Therefore, someone who professes that John Paul II is a saint professes belief in a, quote, God who does not exclude serving other gods as a requirement for sanctification. And that's not the true God. The person's position is therefore idolatrous. The person professes belief in a false God because the one true God has identified himself as the one who, first and foremost, excludes serving other gods as his condition for sanctification. Hence, to formally acknowledge John Paul II as a saint, or to call him a saint, as the entire world following the Vatican II sect now does, is to profess that false gods have the power to sanctify those who serve them, or that the true, quote, God does not exclude serving other gods. There's no way around it, and such a position is idolatrous. That's why the honor given to John Paul II's image is prophesied in Apocalypse chapter 13. The veneration of the image of the Roman king or head of the beast who is wounded, recovers, and deceives the world, as our video Is the World About to End covers in detail. The veneration of his image figures prominently into the prophecy about the beast and the Antichrist, precisely because the honoring of his image is the instrument and the means through which the entire world following the Vatican II sect has been directly implicated in idolatry and the worship of a false god or gods. Never before in history have so many professing Catholics been so quickly and automatically implicated in idolatry and a rejection of the first commandment. The ramifications of this are mind-boggling. It's why for years we've emphasized that people must not accept the Vatican II anti-popes as true popes, and why we've proven that they are not true popes for X, Y, and Z reasons. In fact, in many ways, our work demonstrating that the post-Vatican II claimants to the papacy are not valid popes, a fact that should be quite obvious in light of anti-Pope Francis's activity, pointed to the period we are in right now. For those who still wrongly consider the Vatican II sect to be the Catholic Church and its leaders to be true popes, are in a spiritually fatal position. They are required to venerate John Paul II as a saint, and that is to deny the first commandment and worship a false god. Indeed, it is precisely through the honor given to John Paul II and his image that the devil has been able to get many so-called conservatives, who never otherwise would have participated in something like Assisi or kissing the Koran, to accept idolatry anyway. By venerating John Paul II as a saint, which is now required under pain of mortal sin for followers of the Vatican II sect, those, quote, conservatives are implicated in Assisi, in kissing the Koran, etc., whether they like it or not. With this in mind, we should be able to see quite clearly how the beast that was, and is not, has returned in its most essential feature and characteristic, that is, the imposition of idolatry and the worship of false gods, and how this has been accomplished through the veneration of the image of the Roman king. And John Paul II, in addition to being an anti-pope, was an actual Roman king or monarch. He was one of the 7 kings of the Vatican city-state, a new monarchy that came into existence in Rome in 1929 with the Lateran Treaty, as our videos Is the World About to End and Francis and the 7 Kings of the Apocalypse explain. So, just as the pagan Roman Empire beast implicated multitudes of Christians in idolatry and the worship of false gods, through the honor given to the Roman king and the associated ceremony, the end times beast out of the sea does exactly the same thing. However, the modern version of the beast manages to implicate people all over the world in idolatry and a rejection of the first commandment in a more diabolically efficient way. That is, through the formal veneration of John Paul II a man who notoriously served false gods. To better understand the horrifying consequences of this situation, consider the following example. Suppose that a young professing Catholic around the age of 14 or 15 is told that John Paul II is a saint. The young man honors John Paul II's feast day. A short time later, he looks up John Paul II and he learns that John Paul II invited the worshippers of other gods to Assisi so that they could worship those gods alongside the Catholic God. If he still accepts John Paul II as a saint at that point, even if he doesn't know anything else about the arguments for why John Paul II was a heretic, why the Vatican II sect is not the Catholic Church, how there have been anti-popes in history, how this situation was prophesied, etc., the young man is nevertheless implicated in idolatry. He has denied the first commandment by accepting that one can become holy by serving other gods and building their temples, or that one can be sanctified by, quote, God, despite serving other gods, which means that the God he now believes in is not the one true God. And it doesn't even matter if the young man or anyone else who calls John Paul II a saint never goes to a temple of the false gods and never professes outward belief in those gods. It doesn't make any difference. By simply accepting John Paul II as a saint, the person has denied the first commandment by holding that a person who serves other gods can be sanctified. That's why the honor given to John Paul II's image is foretold in the Apocalypse. It represents the universal imposition of the evils and the idolatry of the Vatican II sect, the Great Harlot, upon its followers, including upon so-called conservatives who otherwise never would have accepted them or blessed them. And it's important to note that if the aforementioned young man had heard that some random so-called Catholic, for whom he had no special respect, organized the followers of other gods to worship those gods, and brought the worship of those gods to the world, in that case the young man might be inclined to question that person's activity or reject him outright as wicked and a false believer. Of course he should do so. However, the fact that serving other gods is now presented to the young man as the activity conducted by John Paul II, a man his, quote, church tells him was holy and is a saint, serves as a powerful enticement to accept John Paul II as holy anyway, and thereby accept that one who serves other gods can be sanctified. That's why this is so devastating and significant. It means that all those, including many, quote, traditionalists, who may have even criticized the Assisi events and John Paul II's religious indifferentism, yet accept him as a saint or even just call him a saint because they accept anti-Pope Francis, are idolaters. They have denied the first commandment. They profess belief in a God who sanctifies those who serve other gods. That's not the true God. These points demonstrate that all those who have obstinately defended the Vatican II anti-popes in the face of the facts are deceivers. Their obstinate adherence to a false position has kept them and others on a direct path to idolatry, and they have now arrived at the destination point. They have served the interests of the devil. They have worked as ministers of Satan and defenders of the Antichrist. These facts show why it's essential to adhere to the true position and widely disseminate the information proving that the Vatican II sect is not the Catholic Church. There are also a few who cling desperately to the counterchurch, but they know they cannot accept the wicked John Paul II as a saint because of what he did in his life. So, they have contrived ways to reject the canonization, yet still claim to accept Francis as the Pope, but they are only fooling themselves. Anti-Pope Francis proclaimed the canonization of John Paul II with the fullness of his, quote, authority. The essential formula he used was as solemn as any canonization in history. If Francis holds the papal office, which he definitely doesn't, the canonization of John Paul II would be as authoritative as any in church history. The process he used and the examination he conducted prior to the solemn declaration are irrelevant. God protects the acts of true popes in such matters, regardless of the study the pope engages in or the process he utilizes, as those who actually believe in papal infallibility know. Therefore, those who say that Francis is the pope, an absurd position on its face, but reject his canonization of John Paul II, have simply fallen into a schismatic position and denied papal infallibility. They have departed from Catholic teaching and embraced something akin to, quote, Old Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy, in a futile attempt to salvage the Great Harlot and the non-papacy of Francis. In the process, they call into question every canonization in church history. Rather than simply accept and defend the truth that the Vatican II claimants to the papacy are anti-popes, they choose to commit mortal sin and deny the protections Jesus Christ gave to his church and the papal office. The only way to reject the canonization of John Paul II, as people must to be saved, is to correctly acknowledge that Francis is not the Pope, but a heretical non-Catholic anti-pope, and that the Vatican II sect is not the Catholic Church. There are others who, in similar desperation, argue that the canonization of John Paul II only means that he repented, or could have repented, of his horrible and wicked activity and then gone to heaven. That claim is also completely false for two reasons. First, since John Paul II consistently promoted false ecumenism, religious indifferentism, and served false gods by his words and deeds in the external forum, according to Catholic teaching, a repudiation of his wicked beliefs and activity would have to be manifested in the external forum for anyone to conclude that he converted from serving false gods. But of course, no such conversion or repudiation of his entire career was ever made in the external forum. In fact, to the contrary, in John Paul II's very last document, his last will and testament, he acknowledges the Rabbi of Rome and the representatives of non-Christian religions, whose false gods he served. And of course, he does not repudiate his apostasy or call the unbelievers to convert to the true God in the Catholic faith. It is therefore forbidden, according to Catholic principles, for anyone to conclude that John Paul II converted from the religious indifferentism, service of false gods, etc., that he displayed for decades. Catholic principles forbid anyone to conclude that he is anywhere but in hell. Second, the aforementioned argument is demolished by the fact that a canonization of a saint does not merely mean that the person is in heaven. It also means that during that person's life as a Catholic, he or she manifested heroic virtue and lived a model Catholic life, even if the conversion to the true faith, manifested clearly in the external forum, occurred shortly before a person's martyrdom or death. As Pope Pius XI taught in his December 31, 1929 encyclical, quote, "The saints have ever been, are, and ever will be the greatest benefactors of society and perfect models for every class and profession," end quote. It is therefore impossible to divorce the canonization of John Paul II from what he did and taught as antipope. Indeed, the Vatican II sect canonized him precisely for his career as antipope, one that was characterized by wickedness, false ecumenism, religious indifferentism, and the service of false gods. Hence, those who accept John Paul II as a saint reject the first commandment and are implicated in idolatry. People also need to understand that the significance of John Paul II and why he was the Antichrist is not found in the fact that people think about him much or even almost at all. That actually doesn't make any difference. His significance, rather, is that as a result of what he did in his life, to simply accept him as a saint one time is to reject the first commandment and be implicated in idolatry. That's why the Apocalypse says that all those who honor the image of the beast, the one who is wounded and recovers, and die unconverted, will be tortured day and night, forever and ever. They will never have any rest, the Apocalypse says. And it makes sense, for they will have professed belief in a God who sanctifies those who serve false gods, and that's not the true God. Moreover, as proven in our video, quote, St. John Paul II Exposed, John Paul II also claimed to be God, and that corresponds to the prophecies about the beast as well. For in the beast that was the pagan Roman Empire, the Roman king claimed to be Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. John Paul II did the same. That's a fact. But the truth covered on that issue is frankly over the heads of most people. No matter how clearly and thoroughly it has been proven that John Paul II actually preached that the Son of God became every man in the Incarnation, and that he is therefore Jesus Christ, the Son of God, most people simply lack the grace and the honesty to recognize what John Paul II taught in that regard. Even though few recognize the truth that John Paul II actually taught that he is Jesus Christ throughout his entire anti-papacy, it makes perfect sense that the one who does fulfill the prophecies about the Antichrist and implicates so many in idolatry also claimed to be God himself. It's also remarkable that through the veneration of his image and the quote canonization, John Paul II is doing as much or even more damage to souls now as he did during his life. The fact that John Paul II was the Antichrist also fits precisely with the prophecies concerning the 7 Roman kings, one of whom is wounded seemingly unto death but recovers, and the beast out of the sea, that is, the European Union, arising during the reign of the 6th king when 5 are fallen. That's covered in detail in our video Is the World About to End, and the video Francis and the 7 Kings of the Apocalypse. With these facts in mind, we should be able to see clearly why the explanation of the Whore of Babylon in Apocalypse 17 is also an explanation of the beast, and why the wonder expressed at the whore is also the wonder expressed at the beast. It's because the Antichrist himself, the Roman king of the beast who is wounded, and then has his image venerated, is one of the antipopes of the Whore of Babylon. And just as the worship of false gods in the pagan Roman Empire beast was intertwined with a requirement to honor the Roman king, in the new version of the beast, there is likewise a ceremony involving the veneration of the image of the Roman king, which is connected with, and indeed the instrument of, a widespread imposition of idolatry. Moreover, the apostasy of the Whore of Babylon is the reason why the godless European Union, the political dimension of the beast out of the sea, was able to form. Hence, the whore sits on top of the beast. Her demonic spiritual leadership and whoredom is the reason a new pagan empire formed in Europe, replacing Christian Europe. Thus, when we look at the actual fulfillment of the prophecy about the beast that was and is not, and the Roman whore who sits on top of it, we can see quite clearly why the angel's explanation of the one was an explanation of the other, and why the wonder expressed at the one was the wonder expressed at the other. And the parallels between the beast that was, the pagan Roman Empire, and the new version, modern-day Europe, become even more interesting. In the beast that was, the pagan Roman Empire, they didn't just impose the worship of false gods and the image of the Roman king. They also required people to honor numerous deceased pagan Roman kings. And in modern-day Europe, the beast out of the sea, the exact same thing is happening. The Whore of Babylon has moved to officially venerate the images of various antipopes of the Vatican II sect, the men who, like John Paul II, also embraced paganism, endorsed evils of various kinds, and served false gods. These were the Roman kings of the Vatican city-state most responsible for the formation of the Vatican II sect, the transformation of Europe, and Europe's return to paganism. That's why Antipope John XXIII, the wicked heretic and Freemason who called the Second Vatican Council, was also, quote, canonized, and the veneration of his image imposed. It's why Antipope Paul VI, the totally demonic heretic, who promulgated the new Mass, confirmed the evil teachings of Vatican II, and attempted to remove the Catholic Mass from much of the world, is to be, quote, beatified. The new version of the pagan Roman Empire is at work right before our eyes, in which the deceased pagan Roman kings, the antipopes most responsible for the repaganization of Europe, are being honored along with false gods. The beast that was and is not has returned. The devil wants the images of these various antipopes, not just John Paul II, to be honored because all of them exemplified wickedness. They all embraced heresy and false religions. They all served false gods. By honoring any of them as sanctified or blessed, one is professing that sanctification comes through wickedness. However, John Paul II's image, the image of the one who was wounded and claimed to be Jesus Christ, is the most significant. It's singled out in the Apocalypse because John Paul II served false gods and built temples for their worship most notoriously, and therefore the veneration of him constitutes the most immediate and direct connection to idolatry for the masses. So, if you think that in the future there will come 7 Roman kings, as part of a new kingdom in Rome, with a new empire on the Mediterranean Sea, constituting a new version of the beast that was, arising when 5 of those kings are fallen, with one of those Roman kings being wounded, deceiving the world, and implicating the masses in idolatry through the veneration of his image, well, you're wrong. That's not coming in the future. It already happened, and we are living through the final stage of it.